Jeremy Hunt, very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us here on Sky News this morning. So Britain faces its biggest hit to living standards on record, wiping out 8 years of improvements. The economy is already in recession and now people are facing a huge rise in the tax burden. You've been in power for 12 years. It's a pretty bleak legacy from the Conservatives, isn't it?
Well, what we have is a very challenging international situation. The drop in growth in Germany, for example, is even higher than here. Countries all over the world are dealing with the inflation shock caused by the Ukraine crisis. And what we have to do as a government is to say, what is the big thing that we can do to help families, to help businesses the most? And what people are worried about is the rise in the cost of living. That weekly shop going up, their mortgage rates going up, their energy bills going up. And this is a plan which, when you cut through the difficult decisions that I announced yesterday, it brings inflation right down, you start to see growth going right up, and you start to see our economy getting back onto an even keel. And that's the most important thing as a Conservative. I know sometimes you have to take difficult decisions, but if in the end that means more stability for families, and we're protecting the NHS and schools, as you said, then we know we're doing the right thing for the long term. And that's what we do in these kinds of situations.
Well, you say that it's a challenging international situation. You're blaming global factors, and undoubtedly the pandemic and the war in Ukraine have had an impact. But don't the Conservatives need to take some responsibility as well? I mean, a lot of what you're doing is about undoing the mess that the mini-budget made and also taking steps to try to convince the markets that you're trustworthy.
Well, we reversed those measures in the mini-budget in 3 weeks. So I think we acted very quickly. We've been completely open. Yes, there were some mistakes. But when you look at America, that's increased taxes by $800 billion, you look at Germany and France that are now saying they're going to reduce their borrowing and introduce much stricter rules. You look at what Putin is doing in Ukraine. This is an international situation coming straight after a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. So
but
these are very serious issues.
Sorry to interrupt, Jeremy Hunt, but we have the lowest growth in the G7. Why is that?
Well, that's not true. We actually have the highest growth in the G7 this year. And if you look at the last 12 years, we've actually had the third highest growth in the G7, despite a lot of global turbulence. Now, over the next 2 years, it is going to be challenging. But I think people want a government that is taking difficult decisions, has a plan that will bring down inflation, stop those big rises in the cost of the energy bills and the weekly shop, and at the same time is taking measures to help people get through this difficult period. The support for energy bills will mean that the average house will have £500 less to pay in their energy bills. We've increased the national living wage, which will mean an extra £1,600 in the pay packets of people who work full-time, and indeed protecting the triple lot for pensioners. So we're doing absolutely everything we can to help people whilst tackling this very, very challenging international situation.
But you're part of the same government that said we were going to see the biggest tax cuts in 50 years, £45 billion worth just 8 weeks ago. Now you're announcing huge tax rises and spending cuts as well, worth a total of £55 billion. What's the public supposed to make of this total reversal in direction in just a short space of time? What does it do to the Conservative Party's credibility?
Well, we've been honest with people that there were some mistakes made, but we're also saying there are much bigger issues to solve than what happened in the mini-budget. We've got a big challenge because of the costs of COVID, the costs of the war in Ukraine, and what we announced yesterday was a long-term plan to see us through to the other side. And I think people want a government that is prepared to take difficult decisions to right the economy, to protect jobs. Yesterday, the Office for Budget Responsibility said the measures I announced will save 70,000 jobs. They'll reduce the severity of the recession by about a third. So that is a government that is doing everything it can to help families get through what is a very, very challenging period.
Well, you say help families through a challenging period, but disposable income is going to fall by more than 7% over the next 2 years. That's the biggest fall on record. We're all going to be a lot worse off, aren't we?
Well, that's what happens when you have high inflation. And that's what happens when Putin is able to blackmail us and countries all over the world by forcing a big rise in international gas prices. And that's why one of the things we announced yesterday was a new nuclear power plant, the first state-backed nuclear power plant for 30 years, to try and stop people like Putin being able to do that blackmail, which is so damaging to our living standards. I think it's important, Anna, to recognise, as a country, we've had bigger challenges before, and we've always thrived and prospered because people have been able to, or been willing to take tough, difficult decisions when they're called for, because people know in their hearts there are big, big issues that we have to resolve, and they want a government that's prepared to take those decisions.
But people will also ask how they're going to pay their bills. I mean, we're facing the worst 2 years in modern history for household incomes. Millions are going to be dragged into higher tax bands. Council tax is likely to go up. Energy bills up again in the spring, and they're already eye-wateringly high. The Resolution Foundation says the typical annual tax bill will rise by £1,700. How are people going to afford it?
Well, that's why we announced a lot of things yesterday. Let me tell you some of the things that we announced that will help people. First of all, the cap on energy bills at £3,000 will save the average house £500. The increase in the state pension by a record 10.1% will increase the average pensioner's income by £870. Then you've got the increase in the national living wage, which we talked about, up to £1,600. Then we're doing one-off payments to people on benefits of £900, one-off payments to pensioners of £300, one-off payments to people with disabilities of £150. And then you've got the reversal of the health and social care levy, which is again another nearly £400. So, you know, put those together, and for the most vulnerable people, there are thousands and thousands of pounds of help that we're offering. But we're doing more than that. We're saying, what is the long-term solution to these cost of living pressures? It's to bring down inflation. And this is a plan that sees inflation fall markedly in the second half of next year. And that, in the end, is going to be the thing that deals with the root cause of people's worries. And that's what we've tried to do today.
Let me just pick out one of the things you mentioned there, and that was honouring the triple lock, seeing pensions rise with inflation. Is it fair, though, that wealthy retirees should enjoy that rise in their income when public sector workers can't?
Well, I think the truth is, first of all, pensioners have retired. They don't have the ability to work more or work longer hours in the way that people of working age do. But I think it's wrong to say that only the poorest pensioners are feeling the squeeze at the moment. I think this is something that's affecting everyone. And I think it's right, having made that promise to pensioners in our manifesto, that we would have this triple lock. I think this is exactly the kind of tough time that people want it to kick in. And so that's why I think it's the right thing to do.
But when a lot of people say you are protecting pensioners, but it's workers that are really being clobbered, aren't they? Given the tax rises that are being imposed on them, does it pay to work under your plans?
Well, we just increased the national living wage to £10.42. That's nearly 10% increase. And that's precisely to make sure we do reward people for working and support people who are on lower pay. So I think we're very aware of those challenges. We're not pretending that this isn't going to be a difficult time for everyone. But what we have is a plan. We're protecting the NHS and schools as we get through a difficult period. And when we get to the other side, you can see inflation coming right down, growth going right up, unemployment coming down, all the things that, you know, they're economic statistics, but they actually affect ordinary families up and down the country. They affect how much we pay for the things we buy. They affect the security of our jobs. And that's why our first responsibility has to be to take the difficult decisions that sort out the root problems the economy is facing.
The tax rises you've announced are astonishing. As a share of GDP, that they're at their highest level since the Second World War. And there are many in your own party that are deeply uncomfortable about that, about putting up taxes when we're in recession. They say it's not very conservative.
Well, the Office for Budget Responsibility say yesterday that what we're doing is actually making the recession shallower. it's saving jobs. But what I would say to my Conservative colleagues is, there is nothing Conservative about spending money that you haven't got. There is nothing Conservative about not tackling inflation. There's nothing Conservative about ducking difficult decisions that put the economy on track. And we've done all of those things, and that's why this is a very Conservative package to make sure that we sort out the economy, which is one of the most important things that people expect from us as a party.
But they might say back to you, household incomes falling by 7% in the next 18 months, essentially the run-up to the next general election. Taxation as a share of GDP at its highest level since the war. Unemployment's going to be rising, house prices are going to be rising. Why would you vote Conservative at the next election?
Anna, I'm going to have to make this the last answer, I'm afraid, because I've got to do some other interviews. But let me answer that very directly. People vote Conservative because they know we will take the tough and difficult decisions in the long-term interests of the country. That's what we are doing today. None of this is easy, but it's the right thing to do. And if we're going to bring down the cost of people's shopping bills, make people's jobs more secure, look after the economy, then people know that's what they get with the Conservative Party. At the same time as that, we're making sure that the NHS has the support it needs, our schools have the support they need to get them through a very difficult period. And that's why I think it's a balanced package that everyone will feel able to support. Thank you very much.
OK, Jeremy Hunt, thank you. We'll let you go and do those other interviews. Thanks very much indeed.